We take history books for granted, right? They're just there. But have you ever really thought about where they come from? Not just the stories, but the actual physical books that preserve these epic tales of empires and heroes? Well, today, we're diving into the absolutely incredible story of how the great histories of the Muslim world were written, how they were almost completely wiped out, and how they were miraculously born again.
If you've spent any time at all with Islamic history, you know these names. These are the Titans. Books by legends like al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Khaldun. This is the bedrock. This is the source for pretty much everything we know about 1,000 years of an entire civilization. Every historian who came after them was, in one way or another, standing on the shoulders of these giants.
But that begs a really fascinating question, doesn't it? If these are the sources, what were their sources? Where did someone like Tabari get all of his information? And that question, my friends, leads us down a rabbit hole of a lost book, a world-changing technological revolution, a golden age of knowledge, and a catastrophe that almost burned it all to the ground. So, let's rewind. Right after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, people weren't really writing history books. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Why would they? The eyewitnesses, the companions who were there for everything, they were still alive. History wasn't something you read in a book. It was a living, breathing story you heard directly from the people who lived it. No books needed. But here's the thing. That first generation couldn't live forever. As they began to pass away, a real problem started to crop up. You have this new generation of young Muslims who had no living connection to those huge foundational events. And so they started to forget. Their own heroes were becoming distant memories, and some were even starting to look up to the heroes of other empires, the Roman Hercules or the Persian hero Rustam, for their inspiration.
The caliph at the time, a really sharp guy named Umar ibn AbdulAziz, saw this happening and knew it was a huge problem. He had to do something. So he commissioned one of the greatest scholars of the day, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, and gave him a mission: travel the lands, find the last surviving companions, and learn everything from them. And al-Zuhri did it. He put all that knowledge together into the very first comprehensive book of Islamic history. An amazing achievement. But then, tragedy. The caliph was assassinated. A few decades later, the entire Umayyad Caliphate just collapsed, and in all that chaos, that priceless, one-of-a-kind first book was lost. Gone forever. Okay, so from the rubble of the Umayyads, a new power rises, the Abbasids. And these guys were obsessed with knowledge. They built this incredible new capital, Baghdad, and right in the middle of it, the legendary library called the House of Wisdom. But they had one massive technological problem holding them back.
See, at the time, everything was written on papyrus, and papyrus is terrible. It's expensive, it's super fragile, it's a huge pain to make. Just writing a single book was a massive project, and copying it was just as hard. So knowledge was rare, simply because the stuff you wrote it on was rare. But that was all about to change, thanks to a secret technology from halfway across the world.
That secret was paper, and the Chinese were guarding it very closely. But then, in the year 751, at a place called the Battle of Talis, the Abbasid army clashed with the Chinese army and won, taking thousands of prisoners. And guess what? Some of those prisoners were craftsmen who knew the secret to making paper. They'd basically traded that knowledge for their freedom. The great Caliph Harun al-Rashid saw the potential in a heartbeat and built a massive paper factory in Baghdad right next to the House of Wisdom. It was a genius move. 300 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's the head start this one piece of technology gave the Muslim world. For 3 centuries, they had cheap, easy-to-make paper, while Europe was still stuck slowly, painstakingly copying texts onto super expensive animal hides. This wasn't just a small leg up, it was a civilization-defining leap into the future. It was the fuel for a golden age. And with that fuel, everything just exploded. Intellectually, creatively, it was a firestorm. With paper being so cheap and durable, that old fear of books just disappearing started to fade away. Knowledge could be copied, it could be shared, it could spread all across the empire like wildfire. The Islamic Golden Age was officially on. And in this new age, the scholars were the rock stars. You had guys like Ibn Hisham, who wrote the oldest history book that we still have today, al-Waqidi, who wrote down everything he could find about the lives of the companions, and of course the great al-Tabari, whose massive history is still a foundational text. And these weren't just academics locked in a library, they were shaping the world. You had Ibn Asakir, whose writing literally inspired Saladin to retake Jerusalem, and Ibn al-Athir, who actually fought right alongside him.
And, These scholars weren't in it for the money or the fame. Not at all. There's this great story about Imam al-Tabari. His school tried to give him this huge bonus, a treasure of gold coins, as a reward for his work. He just looked at it, picked out the 10 dinars that was his normal monthly salary, and said, "This is my salary. I will not take one coin more." For these guys, the work was a sacred duty.
But, as we all know, golden ages don't last forever. After centuries of being the world's intellectual powerhouse, the Abbasid Caliphate started to get weak, kind of rotting from the inside. And, at the same time, a storm was gathering on the horizon. A big one. It's almost a cliché, but it's true. While the Mongol armies were just steamrolling across Asia, getting closer and closer every day, the intellectual scene in Baghdad had kind of turned in on itself. The big debates weren't about science or philosophy anymore, but about these tiny, trivial theological questions. The whole society had just lost its way, its urgency, its connection to what was really happening in the world. And in 1258, that storm finally hit. Hulagu Khan's Mongol army poured into Baghdad. It was a week of absolute, unimaginable horror. The city's people were massacred. And then they turned their attention to the House of Wisdom, the very heart of the Golden Age. They burned it. They dumped countless books, scrolls, and manuscripts into the Tigris River, so many that the story goes the water ran black with ink for days. 400 years. That's the estimate of the knowledge that was lost. Think about that. 4 centuries of science, of history, of philosophy, the life's work of thousands of brilliant minds. All of it just gone, wiped from the face of the earth in a single week. Now, in the aftermath, some incredible scholars like Ibn Kathir and Ibn Khaldun did their best to pick up the pieces. But the Muslim world was deeply wounded, and a brand new technology was about to pop up in Europe that would change the global balance of power for good. And that technology was, of course, the printing press. This thing was a revolution, just as big as paper had been. It was a single machine that could do the work of hundreds of scribes, spreading ideas faster and farther than anyone had ever dreamed possible. But when this incredible machine showed up in the Ottoman Empire, the new center of the Muslim world, it was banned. Now, the reasons were complicated. You had some scholars who argued that real, true knowledge could only be passed on by a human hand with a pen. Others rejected it just because it was seen as a Christian invention. And of course, you had a lot of scribes and scholars who were afraid that mass-produced books would put them out of a job. And the result of that decision, well, it was staggering. Let's look at the numbers. A really skilled Ottoman scribe could maybe copy 40 pages in a day. A European printer with one of these new presses, they could churn out 4,000. That's 100 times difference in productivity. The knowledge gap wasn't just growing, it was exploding. So 300 years, the Muslim world waited. It's an almost tragic, poetic irony, isn't it? The exact same amount of time they once had as a head start with paper became the length of their delay with the printing press. By the time they finally adopted it, it was way too late. The world had changed, and Europe was deep into its renaissance, fueled by the unstoppable flow of printed knowledge. And all of this whole incredible story, brings us to one final, really important question for us, right here, right now. It's a powerful lesson in how choosing to embrace or reject technology can literally define the future of a civilization. So it makes you wonder, what is the world-changing technology that we are debating or fearing or maybe even just completely overlooking today?